to enable the mind to rise above the contemplation of the visible copies of ideas and advance to a knowledge of the ideas themselves. There is, however, something common between them, because the phenomena partake of the idea. The participation is an imitation, but it is also imperfect. That natural phenomenon falls short of ideas. This teaches that the universe are living animals and that they are endowed with the most perfect and intelligent souls, that if God had made the world as perfect as the nature of matter allowed, that he must have endowed it with a perfect soul. This soul acts as a mediator between the ideas and natural phenomena, and is the cause of life, motion, order, and knowledge in the universe. C. The doctrine of Demiurgos in creation. In the myth of creation found in the Timaeus, we find that the doctrine of creation, as it is ascribed to Plato's authorship, as follows. Out of chaos, which was ruled by necessity, God and Demiurgos, or creator, made order by fashioning the phenomena of matter according to the eternal prototypes, the ideas, in as perfect a manner as the imperfection of matter would allow. He next created the gods and ordered them to fashion the body of man, while he himself made the soul of man from the same material as that of the world soul. The soul of man is a self-motivating principle and is responsible for life, motion, and consciousness in the body. The ethical doctrines that have been attributed to Plato are A. that of the highest good, the summum bonum; B. the connotation of virtue; C. the reduction of the virtues to four and the place of wisdom among them. A. as something subjective, and as an earthly experience, the highest good is happiness, but as an objective attainment, it is the idea of good and consequently identified with God. Therefore, the purpose of man's life is freedom from the fetters of the body in which the soul is confined, and that the practice of virtue and wisdom makes him God even while on earth. Virtue is the order, the health, and the harmony of the soul. There are many virtues, but the greatest is wisdom. All virtues may be reduced to the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, fortitude, temperance, and justice. The doctrine attributed to Plato in the field of civics is the doctrine of the ideal state, whose attributes are compared with the attributes of the soul and injustice. In a state, virtue should be the chief aim, and unless philosophers become rulers or rulers become thorough students of philosophy, there will be unceasing trouble for states and humanities at large. The ideal state is modeled upon the individual soul, and just as the soul has three parts, so also the state have three parts: the rulers, the warriors, and the workers. Similarly, just as the harmony of the souls depend upon the proper subordination of its parts, so also does the state depend upon the proper subordination of its parts in order to enjoy peace. Here Plato introduces the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds in order to show the virtues is the soul as justice is to the state. One horse is of noble origin, which the other ignoble, and consequently they cannot agree. As the noble horse strives to mount up to the heavenly regions which are suitable to its nature, so the other tries to drag him down. Likewise, in dealing with the soul, it is the proper subordination of its parts that enables the noble in man to obtain its excellence. So also in dealing with the state, it is justice, or the proper subordination of the different classes, that makes it an ideal state. The doctrines of Plato are eclectic and point to Egyptian origin. 1. The doctrine of the real and unreal to represent doctrine found in the comparison between natural phenomena and the ideas is only an instance of the application of the doctrine of opposites. Here the things of this world have their corresponding types in the heavenly realm. Here the ideas correspond to being, while the natural phenomena corresponds to not being. But the doctrine of the opposites may be traced back not only to Socrates, Democritus, Parmenides, and Pythagoreans, but further back to its original source, the Egyptian mysteries, where the principle of opposites was represented not only by pairs of male and female gods, such as Osiris and Isis, Asar and Aset, but also many pairs of pillars in the front of all the Egyptian temples. Plato is credited with expressing this doctrine in the form of a simile, in which he compares the world to a living animal which is composed of souls, one being made perfect and responsible for life, motion, and knowledge of the animal or universe. This doctrine may be traced not only to a Democritus, who based his teaching about the fire atoms of the soul and cognition upon magical principles of the Egyptians, that the qualities of an animal are distributed throughout its pairs. This doctrine of Nous, as a matter of fact, originated from the Egyptian mystery systems, in connection which the god Osiris was represented in all Egyptian temples by the symbol of an open eye, referred to as elsewhere. The symbol indicated not only the sight that transcended space and time, but also as the great mind which created and which still directs the universe. The symbol also forms a part of the decoration of all Masonic lodges of the modern world and dates back to the Osirian or sun worship of the Egyptians more than 5,000 years BC. This same notion was represented by the Egyptians by a god with eyes all over him and was known as the all-seeing eye. This doctrine, which is ascribed to the authorship of Plato, did not by any means originate from Plato. It was not only a current doctrine at the time of Plato, but was well known among the Eastern ancient nations and taught by them many centuries before his time, 427 through 347 BC. History tells us that the Persians taught this doctrine more than 6 centuries BC through their leader Zoroaster. History also tells us that Pythagoras, 500 BC, taught the same doctrine expressed in terms of monads. The universe consisted of 2 unities: the unity from which the series of numbers or being is derived, being absolute unity, which is the source of all; the monad of monads, or the God of gods, and B, the one, the first in the series of derived numbers or beings. It is opposed to and limited by polarity, and therefore and is relative in unity, a created monad or God, consequently the opposition between one and the many that is the source of all the rest. Furthermore, history likewise tells us that the original source of the doctrine of a demiurge in the creation was Egypt, and it dates back to the creation story of Egypt, 4000 BC, which is also to be found in the account given by the Memphite theology, an inscription on stone now kept in the British Museum. It contains the theological and cosmological views of the Egyptians, which date back to the very beginning of Egyptian history, when the first dynasties had made their new capital at Memphis, the cities of the god Ptah, about 4000 BC or even earlier. The Egyptian cosmology must be represented in 3 parts, each part being supplementary to the other and presenting a complete philosophy by their combination. The first part deals with the gods of chaos. Part 2 deals with the gods of order and arrangement in creation. And part 3 dwells with the primate of the gods through whose logos creation was accomplished. And part 1, pre-creation, or chaos is represented by Ptah, the primate of gods emerging from the primeval waters, Nun, in the form of a hill, Tatjinan, the risen land, Atum, or Adam, the son of God, immediately joining Ptah by emerging also from the chaotic waters Nun and sitting upon him, the hill. A description of the other qualities with the chaos follows. There are 4 pairs of males and females gods in the form of frogs and serpents. Their names are Nun and Nunet, the primeval ocean and primeval matter, Hu and Huet, the immutable and the boundless, Huk and Kuket, darkness and obscurity, and D, Amun and Amunet, the hidden and concealed ones. In part 2, the gods of order and arrangements are represented as follows. The same first pair of pre-creation gods are together present. Ptah, the primeval hill, who is the thought and word of all gods, together with Adam, who rests upon Ptah. Adam, having absorbed the thought and creative power of Ptah, then proceed with the work of creation. He names 4 pairs of his own body which become gods, and in this way 8 gods are created, who together with himself become 9 gods in one family or godhead called the Enat. Magic is the key to the interpretation of ancient religions and philosophy. Part 3 tells the story of specific powers of Ptah, which Adam absorbs, but not all tell us how he absorbs them. Part 1 tells us, for it describes the movement of Adam and emerging from the primeval waters and sitting upon Ptah. It, however, does not give us the reason for Adam's movement, a behavior which can be understood only when we apply its interpretation, the key of magical principles. C, the magical principle. Now, which is the magical principle involved in Adam's behavior? In this, the qualities or attributes of entities, human or divine, are distributed throughout their various parts, and contact with such entities release those qualities. D, it is now clear that by making contact with Ptah, Adam immediately received the attributes of Ptah, creative thought and speech, of omnipotence, and became the instrument and the logos and the demiurge through whom the task of creation was undertaken and completed. E, it is also clear that according to the Memphites theology, the doctrines of demiurge and created gods originated from the Egyptian religion and mystery systems, and not from Plato, who lived from 427 through 347 BC, and not from Plato, who lived from 427 to 347 BC. This is really the earliest theory of salvation, and it originated from the Egyptian mysteries, but not from Plato. A, the main purpose of the Egyptian mysteries was the salvation of human soul. The Egyptians believed the human body to be a prison house where the soul is chained by 10 fetters. This condition not only kept them separated from God, but made him subject to the will of rebirth or reincarnation. In order to escape from the effects of his condition, 2 requirements had to be fulfilled by the neophyte. 1, he must keep the 10 commandments taught by the mysteries, for by such a discipline he would gain conquest over the fetters of the soul and liberate it so as to make its developments possible. And 2, he, now being well qualified and duly prepared, must undergo a series of initiations in order to develop his soul from the human stage to that of a god. Such a transformation was known as salvation. It placed the neophyte in harmony with nature, man and God. It deified him, made him become more godlike, and this attainment was known as the highest good. According to this theory of salvation, man is expected to work out his own salvation without a mediator between himself and his God. B, Plato defines virtue as the order or discipline of the soul. This meaning we accept, since it agrees with the purpose of the 10 commandments of the mysteries. The doctrines of the 10 virtues and the 10 fetters are as old as the Egyptian history itself. Each commandment or discipline represented a principle of virtue, and the function of each virtue was to remove a fetter. Since a life of virtue was antecedent and preparatory for those further experiences, the initiations which led to gradual perfection and the divinity of the neophyte. C. Plato is credited with having reduced all virtues to 4 cardinal virtues, and with assigning the highest place among them to wisdom as follows: wisdom, fortitude, temperance, and justice. We are also informed through the history of philosophy that Socrates, the alleged teacher of Plato, taught that the wisdom was equivalent of all virtue. This divergence of opinion between pupil and teacher is significant, since it points to the fact that the both of them simply speculated about a system of ethics which was current in the ancient world and which neither of them had produced. This system of ethics, as has already been mentioned, belonged to the mystery systems of Egypt, which required the neophytes in preparation for initiation to keep the following 10 commandments, underlying which were 10 principles of virtue. The neophyte must 1. Control his thoughts, 2. Control his actions, 3. Have devotion of purpose, 4. Have faith in the ability of his master to teach him the truth, and 5. Have faith in him to assimilate the truth, 6. Have faith in himself, wield the truth, 8. Be free from resentment under experience of wrong, 9. Cultivate the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and 10. Cultivate the ability to distinguish between the real and the unreal. He must have a sense of values. If we now compare the order in which the above outlined with the order in which the cardinal virtues are said to be arranged, we shall immediately see the first place which wisdom occupies the virtues was given to it by the Egyptian mysteries and not by Plato. Consequently, in 1 and 2, from the control of thoughts and action, we derive the virtue of wisdom. In 6, the freedom of the resentment under persecution, we derive the virtue of fortitude. In 9 and 10, from the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and between the real and unreal, we derive the virtues of justice and temperance. Concerning the authorship and source of this doctrine, there are 2 conclusions. First, Plato was not the author of the Republic, and second, the allegory of the charioteer and winged steeds is not a product of Plato, but is derived from the Egyptian Book of the Dead in the Judgment Drama. Concerning the first conclusion, it is only necessary to reaffirm what has already been stated in connection with the writings of Plato, and that it is that they are disputed not only by such modern scholars as Grote and Shatsmith, but also by ancient historians, Diogenes Laertius, Anaxagoras, and Favorinus, who declared that the subject matter of the Republic was found in controversies written by Protagoras, at the time of whose death Plato was about a boy. Furthermore, the authorship of Plato rests upon the opinions of Aristotle and Theophrastus, both of whom aims were the compilation of a Greek philosophy with Egyptian material. Concerning the second conclusion, it must be pointed out that the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds is a description of the quality and destiny of the soul as it appears at the bar of justice in the judgment drama of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In this drama, the great chief justice and president of the unseen world, Pamethus, Osiris, is seated on the throne and is attended by the goddess Isis and Nephites, while 42 assistant judges are seated around. Near Osiris, there are 4 genii, or Amenthi, the unseen world, represented as short vases called canopy, in which the different viscera, symbolizing the moral qualities of the individual, are kept embalmed. The intestines hive are very important connections with the moral qualities of the individual, since they are blamed for any sin which the individual commits. At the opposite end, the deceased is introduced by Horus, while in the center stands the scale of justice, which has been erected by Anubis. On one side of it there appears a heart-shaped vase containing the moral qualities of the deceased, while on the other hand there is a figure of the goddess of truth. Thoth, the scribe, holding a roll of papyrus, stands by and makes a record of the weighing. After this is completed, Horus receives the record from Thoth and advances to Osiris to make known the results. Osiris listens and at the end of the report pronounces sentence of reward or punishment. In the meantime, fearful monsters lurk around the scene to destroy the soul if the verdict is against it. Let us observe that the motion of the scale in the judgment drama corresponds with the up and down of the winged steeds of the allegory. 2. The opposite qualities weighed on the scale corresponds with the opposite qualities posed by the noble and ignoble steeds of the allegory. 3. The idea of justice symbolized by the scale of judgment drama corresponds with the idea of justice expressed in the allegory. 4. The winged steeds corresponds with the monsters of the judgment drama. B. The authorship of the Republic. According to Diogenes Laertius, Book 3 and pages 311 and 327, it is stated both by Aristoxenus and Phavorinus that nearly the whole of the subject matters of Plato's Republic was found in the controversies written by Protagoras. Furthermore, according to Roger Student's History of Philosophy, it is stated that although Plato may have drawn heavily upon the reminiscences of Socrates, whose lectures he attended, yet the subject matter of the Republic is a more carefully reasoned system of philosophy than can be easily attributed to Socrates. The whole volume is a cumulative argument in which into there are subtly interwoven opinions on most every subject of philosophical importance. It is obvious that modern scholarship doubts that Plato drew the subject matter of the Republic from Socrates and is inclined to attribute authorship to Plato himself. If, however, we take into consideration the fact that the subject matter of the Republic was in circulation long before the time of Plato, for Protagoras is supposed to have lived from 481 through 411 BC and Plato from 427 through 347 BCE. Reasons forbids the assignments of the authorship of Plato. But the important question remains, from what source did Protagoras draw the ideas of the Republic which were circulated in the controversies? Textbook on Greek philosophy tells us that Protagoras was a pupil of Democritus, but when we return to the writings of Democritus, we are unable to discover any connection between them and the A. educational system and B. paternal government which are advocated in the Republic. This fact forces us to the conclusion that the subject matter of Plato's Republic was neither produced by Plato nor any Greek philosopher, and C. the authorship of Timaeus. According also to Diogenes Laertius, Book 8, pages 399 through 401, when Plato visited Dionysius at Sicily, he paid Philostalos, a Pythagorean, 40-year Alexandria mina of silver for a book from which he copied the whole contents of Timaeus. Under these circumstances, it is clear that Plato wrote neither the Republic nor the Timaeus, whose subject matter identifies them with the purpose of the mysteries of Egypt. The only nearby nation who specialized in the manufacture of chariots and breeding of horses was the Egyptians. When Joseph was governor in Egypt, the horse and war chariot were in use, and when the Israelites fled from the country, Pharaoh pursued them to the Red Sea in chariots. Even Homer and Diodorus had visited Egypt, testified that they saw a great multitude of war chariots and numerous stables along the banks of the Nile from Memphis to Thebes. And since the judgment drama in the Egyptian Book of the Dead reveals the entire philosophy contained in the allegory, Plato cannot be credited as its author. The following sketch of the military history of the Greeks shows that the chariot was not used by them, nor was it their culture. Chariots were not used in any of these engagements. In 432 BC, Athens' blockade Pontidia and Megara was excluded from Greek markets. In 431 BC, Thebes attacked Plateau, and while a Peloponnesian army occupied Attica, an Athenian fleet raided Peloponnesus. Pericles conducted the evacuation of Attica. The oligarchs at the Corsica was massacred, and after the seizure of Amphilopolis, Nicias sued for peace in 422 BC. It is evident that the Greek culture and tradition did not furnish Plato with the idea of the charioteer and winged steeds, for nowhere in their brief military history do we find the use of such a war machine by the Greeks as a chariot. The only nearby nation who specialized in the manufacture of chariots and horses breeding was the Egyptians, as already mentioned. And since the judgment drama in the Egyptian Book of the Dead depicts the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds, credit for its authorship cannot be given to Plato, but to the Egyptians. According to the textbooks on the history of Greek philosophy, Aristotle was born 384 BC at Stagria, a town in which Thrace, his father, Neomachus, is said to have been a physician to Amanitas, king of Macedonia. Nothing is mentioned in the books about his early education, only that he became an orphan and that at the age of 19, he went to Athens, where he spent 20 years as a pupil of Plato. We are also informed that after the death of Plato, his nephew became the master of his school, and that Aristotle left immediately for Mysia, where he met and married the niece of Hermias. Likewise, that after the death of Amanitas at Macedon, his son Philip, having become king, appointed Aristotle as tutor of his son Alexander as a boy of 13 years, later to be called the Great in consequence of his conquest of Egypt. After Philip's assassination in 336 BC, Alexander became queen, and we are informed that he immediately planned an Asiatic campaign and included Egypt, during which time Aristotle is said to have returned to Athens and founded a school in a gymnasium called Lyceum. We are further informed that after Aristotle conducted this school for only 12 years, that Alexander the Great advanced him in the funds to purchase a large number of books, that his pupils were called Peripatetics, and that owing to an indictment for impiety brought against him by a great priest named Eurymedon, he fled from Athens to Chalcis in Euboea, where he remained in exile until his death in 322 BC. The doctrines of Aristotle, metaphysics, or the principles of being in the metaphysical realm. Aristotle defines metaphysics as the science of being and being. He names the attributes of being as actuality, perfection, and potentially the capacity for perfection. He states that all beings are composed of actuality and potentiality. These two principles are present and mixed in all created beings except one, whose being is actuality and includes the composition of A, matter and form, B, substance and accident, C, soul and its faculties, and D, active and passive intellect. Principles of being in the physical realm. There are four principles of being in the physical realm, which are called causes. 1. Matter. The material cause is the potentiality or capacity of existence. It is that out of which is made. 2. Form or essence. The formal cause is that which gives actuality to existence. It is into which a thing is made. When matter is united with form, the result is organized and realized being that has come to existence and process of nature. 2. The formal cause is that which gives actuality to existence. It is that into which a thing is made. When matter is united with form, the result is organized and realized, being that has come to existence in the process of nature. 3. Final cause. That is for which everything exists. Everything has a purpose, and that purpose is the final cause. A final cause always implies intelligence, but this is not always true in the case of the efficient cause. Consequently, in the realm of nature, every being or living organism is the complex effect of four causes. 1. The substance out of which it is made. 2. The type or idea according to which the embryo tends to develop. 3. The act of creation or generation. 4. The purpose or end for which the organism is created. In other words, matter, type, creation, and purpose are the four principles which underlie all existing things. Doctrines concerning the existence of God. Although motion is external, there can not be an indefinite series of movers and the moved. Therefore, there must be one, the first in the series, which is unmoved. The actual is the antecedent to the potential, for although last in appearance, is really first in nature. Therefore, before all matter and the composition of actual and potential, pure actuality must have existed. Therefore, actuality is the cause of all things that exist, and since it is pure actuality, its life is essentially free from all material conditions. It is the thought of thought, the absolute spirit, who dwells in eternal peace and self-enjoyment, who knows himself and the absolute truth, and is in need of neither action nor virtue. 3. God is one. For matter is the principal polarity, and the first intelligence is free from material conditions. His life is contemplative thought. Neither providence nor will is comparable with the eternal response in which he dwells. God is not concerned with the world. 4. The doctrine of the origin of the world. The world is eternal because matter, motion, and time are eternal. 5. The doctrine concerning nature. Nature is everything which has principle of motion and rest. It is spontaneous and self-determining from within. Nature does nothing in vain, but according to definite law, it is always striving for the best according to a plan of development which is obstructed only by matter. The striving of nature is through the less perfect to the more perfect. 6. The doctrine concerning the universe. The world is globe-shaped, circular, and most perfect in form. The heaven, which is comprised of ether, stands in immediate contact with the first cause. The stars, which are eternal, come next in order. The earth ball is in the middle and is the furthest from the prime mover, at least participant of divinity. 7. The doctrine of the soul. The soul is not merely a harmony of the body or blended of opposites. It is neither the four elements nor compound, for it transcends all material conditions. The soul and body are not two distinct things, but one in two different spaces. Just as form is related to matter, the soul is the power which the living bodily possesses, and it is in the end for which the bodily exists. the final cause of its existence. While the soul, which is the radical principle of life, is one yet has several faculties. Those faculties are sensitive, rational, nutritive, appetitive, and locomotive. One of these, the sensitive and the rational, are the most important, sensation being the faculties by which the forms are sensible things are received, just as impressions is made by a seal, and intelligent knowledge being the faculty by of which intellectual knowledge is acquired. It is the seat of ideas only. It does not create them, since knowledge comes through the senses. By declaring that attributes of being as A, actuality or determining principle, and B, potentiality or the indeterminate principle, Aristotle attempted to explain reality in the terms of principle of opposites. But this principle was used not only by the Pythagoreans, Parmenides, and Democritus in a similar matter, but also Socrates in his attempt to prove the immortality of the soul, and by Plato, who saw reality as the concept of things as distinguished from the things themselves, as the noumena as distinct from the phenomena, and as the real distinct from the unreal. But the principle of opposites originated from the Egyptian mystery system, whose gods were male and female, and whose temples carried in front of them two pillars as symbols of principles of opposites. It is obvious that Aristotle was not the author of this doctrine. 2. The existence of God. The teleological concept has not only been embraced by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, but also by the peoples of the remotest antiquity. In the accounts found in the first chapter of Genesis and in the Memphite theology found in chapters 20 and 23 of Frankfurt's ancient Egyptian religion, creation precedes chaos to order by definite and gradual steps, showing design and purpose in nature and suggesting that it must be the work of a divine intelligence. The dates of these sources carry us back far into antiquity, many centuries before the time of Aristotle, between 2 and 5000 BC. We are also told that in addition to the teleological concept, Aristotle introduced the concept of the unmoved mover in order to prove the existence of God. But the unmoved mover is none other than the atom of the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, the demiurge through whose command were created out of 4 different parts of his body and who accordingly moved out of him. This act of creation took place while Atum remained unmoved, as he embraced Ptah. Thus the family of the 9 gods were created, and thus has been named the Ennead. It is quite clear that the concept of the unmoved mover is derived from the Egyptian theological or mystery system and not from Aristotle, as the modern world has been made to believe. Incidentally, but no less important, it might be mentioned here that in this story of the created gods by Atum, the son of God, into a family of 9, the Ennead, we have originated the source of 2 important scientific hypotheses of modern times. 1, there are 9 major planets, and 2, the sun is the parent of the other planets. A, the worship of the planets began in Egypt, and B, the Egyptian temples were the first observatories of history. C, in attempting to prove the existence of God or a first cause by reference to actuality or potentiality, Aristotle followed the traditional customs of the ancients, who used the principle of opposites in order to explain the functions of nature. D, Plato used it through the theory of ideas to explain the real and unreal and the phenomena of nature. E, Socrates used it in order to establish the fact of immortality by showing that the death of one form of life existing things is but the beginning of another form of life of these things. In other words, life is perpetual. It only changes in form in its course of progress. Democritus applied that the principles of opposite in their interpretation of a particular phase of reality. We cannot therefore consider Aristotle's use of the terms actuality and potentiality and the problem of the existence of God as a new method of interpretation. Furthermore, Aristotle's review of the doctrines of all his previous philosophers, including Plato, together with all the exposure of their errors and inconsistencies, show that he had become confident not only of the fact that he was in possession of a new and correct knowledge, one that he had not before had been made available to the Greeks, but also that he could then speak with great authority. Right here, I must say that I am convinced that Aristotle represents a culture gap of 5,000 years or more between his innovations and the Greek level of civilization, because it is impossible to escape the conviction that he obtained his education and books from a nation outside of Greece, the Egyptians, who were far in advance in culture of the Greeks of his day. The doctrines of the origin of the world. According to the doctrine that has been ascribed to Aristotle, because matter, motion, and time are external, therefore he would also been ascribed to Democritus 400 BC, whose dictum we are all quite familiar with: ex nihilo nil fit. Nothing comes out of nothing, and consequently matter or the world must always have existed. But the antiquity of the doctrine of the eternal nature of matter takes us back to the creation of the Memphite theology, or Egyptians, in which chaos is represented by the primeval ocean Nun, out of which there arose the primeval hill Tatjinin. Under those circumstances, we cannot give Aristotle credit for the authorship of his doctrine. But the antiquity of doctrine of the eternal nature of matter takes us back to the creation story of the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, in which chaos is represented by the primeval ocean Nun, out of which there arose the primeval hill Tatijan. In addition to the false authorship it has been attributed to Aristotle, he contradicts himself in his physics when he also speaks of the world as cause. A thing cannot be eternal and infinite and at the same time finite. Aristotle defines nature as that which possesses the principal notion and rest, and also as that the notion is an effect to move from the less perfect to the more perfect by a definite law, supposedly what we today call evolution. As we examine this definition, we find that Aristotle has only applied the principle of opposites to explain one of the modes by which nature has revealed herself, just as he has done in an attempt to explain being in the dual terms of actuality and potentiality. But change and motion, permanence and rest were by no means new problems at the time of Aristotle, since they appear to have been investigated not only by Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus, but by also Democritus, who stressed the notion of performance in his famous dictum, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes, implying thereby that nature is permanent and eternal. Similarly, his reference to nature's movement from the least perfect to the more perfect was by no means a new discovery of a principle of nature. The creation account found in the first chapter of Genesis speaks of the gradual development of life, in which the demiurge of Logos was engaged at work during the 6 stages and rested on the 7th. Similarly, the creation account of the Egyptians, found in Memphite theology, also speaks of nature's movement from chaos to order. These accounts, by many thousands of years, antedated Aristotle times. By the former is about 2,000 years, while the latter 4,000 BC, and since the principle of opposites has already been shown to originate from the Egyptians, as well that of the gradual development in life, it is clear that this doctrine on the attributes of nature did not originate from Aristotle. According to Aristotle, the soul possesses the following attributes: 1. Identity with body as formed with matter. 2. Power, which a living bodily possess. The radical principles of life manifesting itself in the following attributes: sensitive, rational, nutritive, appetitive, and locomotive. This description only of the soul by Aristotle seems very somewhat from a more familiar and current ideas held by atomists on the one hand of Socrates, Plato, and Pythagoreans on the other. But while the former believed that the soul is material and is composed of 9 fire atoms, the latter regarded it as harmony of the body and a blending of opposites. Naturally, we are now forced to ask the question, does this doctrine of soul originate from Aristotle? It is clear that he did not get it from his teacher Plato, nor from the Pythagoreans and the atomists, but from some other source outside of Greece. As we turn our attention to ancient history, we happily discover that there are 2 such sources outside of Greece. 1, the creation and story in Genesis, the 1st chapter, and 2, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which does not only contain attributes of the soul identical with those mentioned by Aristotle, but far more in elaborate systems of philosophy in which human nature is explained as a unity of 9 inseparable parts, consisting of different bodies and souls, interdependent upon one another, the physical body being one of them. In the Genesis story, it is asserted that God made man out of matter and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Here we have a clear statement of the identity of body and soul, taken from a document which antedates Aristotle by many centuries. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, we also find that human soul is composed of the following 9 inseparable parts. 1, the Ka, which is an abstract personality of the man to whom it belongs, possessing the form and attributes of a man, with power of locomotion, omnipresence, and ability to receive nourishment like a man. It is equivalent to Eidolon. 2, the Ka, the concrete personality, the physical body, which is mortal. 3, the heart and soul, which dwells in Ka and sometimes alongside it. In order to supply it with air and food, it has the power to metamorphosis and change its form at will. 4, the Ab, the heart, the animal life of man, and is rational, spiritual, and ethical. It is associated with Ba and the Egyptian judgment drama. It undergoes examination in the presence of Osiris, the judge of the unseen world. 5, the Kabit. It is associated with Ba, heart and soul, from whom, like the Ka, it receives its nourishment. It has the power of locomotion and omnipresence. 6, the Ku, spiritual soul. It is also closely associated with Ba, heart and soul, and is ethereal being. 7, Sahu, spiritual body, in which the Ku or spiritual soul dwells. In it, all the mental and spiritual attributes of the natural body are united to the new powers of its own nature. 8, Sekhem, or the power of spiritual personification of the virtual force in a man. Its dwelling place is in the heavens with spirits or Kuts. 9, the Ren, the name or the essential attribute for the preservation of the being. The Egyptians believed that in the absence of a name, an individual ceased to exist. It must be noted that according to the Egyptian concept, the soul has 9 parts whose unity is complete, that even the Ren, the name, is an essential attribute, since without it, it cannot exist. The Ba is connected with Ka, Kabit, and Ab on the one hand, and also with Ku and Sekhem, spiritual soul and spiritual personification of vital force on the other hand, as the power of nourishment. The Sahu is a spiritual body which is caused by both Ku and Sekhem. The Ka, the physical body, is essential to the soul while manifesting it upon the physical plane. The soul has the additional following attributes: omnipresence, metamorphosis, locomotion, nutritive, immortality, rationality, spirituality, morality, ethereal, shadowy, and it's clear from such a comparison as this that the Aristotelian doctrine of the soul is identical and coincides with a very small portion of the Egyptian philosophy of the soul, which therefore stands in relation to it as a whole to its part. Consequently, we must conclude that Aristotle obtained his doctrines of the soul from the Egyptian Book of the Dead directly or indirectly. The Library of Alexandria was the true source of Aristotle's large numbers of books. It is to be expected that the Library of Alexandria was immediately ransacked and looted by Alexander and his party, no doubt made up of Aristotle and others who did not only carry off large quantities of scientific books, but also frequently returned to Alexander for the purpose of research. Just as these books were captured in Egypt by the army of Alexander and fell into the hands of Aristotle, so after Aristotle's death, these very books were detained to be captured by a Roman army and conveyed to Rome according to the following story taken from the history of Strabo and Plutarch. The books of Aristotle fell into the hands of Theophrastus, who succeeded him as head of his school. At the death of Theophrastus, they were bequeathed to Neleus of Sepius. After the death of Neleus, the books were hidden in a cellar where they remained for almost 2 centuries. When the Athens captured by the Romans in 84 BC, the books were captured by Sulla and carried into Rome, where Tyrannio a grammarian secured copies and enabled Andronicus and Rhodes to publish them. The fragmentary characters of Aristotle's writings and the lack of their unity reveal the fact that he himself made notes hurriedly from the books while doing his research at the great Egyptian library. The ancient teachings methods was oral, not by lecture and note-taking. Right here I must repeat that I am convinced that Aristotle represents a culture gap of 5,000 years between his innovation and the Greek level of civilization. It is impossible to escape the conviction that he obtained his education and books from a nation outside of Greece, who was far ahead of the culture of Greeks of his day, and that was the Egyptians.
Rocking more powers. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. Up jumps the boogie. Rocking more powers. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. We rockin' more powers. We rockin' more powers. 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 Up jumps the boogie to the bang bang boogie. I cut off your head, nigga. One time for your mind, this is what I said, nigga. You see red. More powers. More powers. More powers. More powers.